Lake Mead has lost 174 feet of elevation since 2000. 25 million people across 7 states depend on what remains. The Colorado River, the artery that feeds it all, now delivers less water than the system demands. Every year, the deficit widens. Every year, the bathtub ring on Hoover Dam's canyon walls climbs higher. The crisis is not approaching. It is already here. Lake Mead currently sits at 37% of its total capacity. The Bureau of Reclamation has recorded elevation levels near 1,045 feet above sea level, dangerously close to the 895-foot dead pool threshold, the point at which water can no longer physically flow through Hoover Dam's intake towers. At dead pool, the dam generates zero power. At dead pool, the turbines stop. The Bureau declared the first-ever Tier 1 water shortage in August 2021. It has since escalated to Tier 2 and Tier 3 restrictions, forcing Nevada, Arizona, and Mexico to absorb mandatory delivery cuts, totaling 21% below their historical allocations. The federal government allocated $4 billion through the Inflation Reduction Act to pay farmers in water districts upstream to leave water in the reservoir. Early results show modest recovery, but the structural imbalance, a river system legally obligated to deliver 16.5 million acre-feet annually that now produces closer to 12 million, has not changed. The arithmetic does not work, but here is the detail that tells the real story. Hoover Dam's intake towers were engineered in the 1930s with 2 intake levels, the upper towers at elevation 1,050 feet and the lower towers at 895 feet. Federal engineers have known since at least 2015 that the upper towers would become non-operational well before the reservoir reached dead pool. That means the dam's functional failure threshold is not 895 feet. It is closer to 950 feet. That threshold is within the range of projections for the mid-2030s under continued drought conditions. The Bureau of Reclamation has not publicly corrected this figure in its consumer-facing communications. The official dead pool number, 895 feet, continues to appear in press briefings and government websites, presenting a margin of safety that the engineering reality does not support. In 1922, 7 states signed the Colorado River Compact, dividing water rights based on flow data collected during one of the wettest decades on record in the American West. Hydrologist Eugene Shoup warned as early as 1963 that the compact's allocations exceeded the river's long-term average yield by as much as 20%. His findings were shelved. Construction of Glen Canyon Dam completed in 1966, creating Lake Powell upstream and adding a second major reservoir to the system, doubling storage capacity, but also doubling evaporative loss, which now consumes roughly 800,000 acre-feet of water per year that never reaches consumers. In 1996, the U.S. Geological Survey published flow projections showing a consistent downward trend in Colorado. River runoff correlated with rising temperatures across the Rocky Mountain snowpack region. The Bureau of Reclamation commissioned its own study in 2007. That study, known as the Colorado River Interim Guidelines Review, acknowledged a supply-demand imbalance but recommended only voluntary conservation measures. No binding cuts followed. By 2014, tree ring paleoclimate data published by researchers at the University of Arizona, confirmed the river had entered what scientists called a megadrought, a drought cycle potentially lasting decades, not years. The Bureau's operational planning documents did not reflect this timeline. Growth permits across Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Tucson continued to be issued. Golf courses continued to expand. Agricultural water contracts, consuming 70% of the river's output, remained largely untouched. The root cause is not drought. Drought is the trigger. The root cause is a legal architecture designed to distribute water that was never really there. Dr. Brad Udall, Senior Water and Climate Research Scientist at Colorado State University, has spent 2 decades studying the gap between Colorado River allocations and physical reality. He said this: "We have a structural problem. We allocated a river that does not exist in the volume we thought it did, and we built an entire civilization on that assumption." That statement was made to a Senate subcommittee in 2023. The subcommittee took no binding action. Udall's research shows that climate-driven aridification, not just cyclical drought, accounts for roughly half of the river's observed flow decline since 2000. The other half is consumptive demand that has never been brought into alignment with supply. To understand the scale, the Colorado River system serves roughly the same population as the entire nation of Australia. Australia's total annual water extraction from all sources combined is approximately 17 billion cubic meters. The Colorado River, in its current diminished state, delivers the equivalent of just over 14.8 billion cubic meters annually, and that figure continues to decline by an estimated 9% for every additional degree Celsius of warming in the basin. The western United States is currently running 1.2 degrees Celsius above its 20th century average. Maria Gutierrez is 54 years old. She has worked the same 40-acre alfalfa farm outside Yuma, Arizona, for 23 years. Her hands are calloused to the second knuckle. The skin on her forearms is permanently sun-darkened from working rows that begin before sunrise. This spring, she received a letter from the Central Arizona Project notifying her that her Tier 3 allocation had been reduced by 592 acre-feet, nearly a third of her annual water budget. She is now drilling a secondary well at a cost of $34,000 she does not have, hoping to reach a groundwater table that her neighbor's well already hit dry last November. She gets up at 4:45 every morning and checks the soil moisture sensors her son installed along the eastern rows. The numbers tell her what she already knows. She is watching a farm die in slow motion. Maria Gutierrez is not a statistic. She is the human face of a policy failure that prioritized growth projections over physical hydrology for more than a century. The cascading consequences reach far beyond the reservoir's edge. Hoover Dam currently generates approximately 4.2 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity per year, powering portions of Nevada, Arizona, and California. At current depletion rates, generation capacity drops proportionally with water elevation. A 2022 analysis by the Western Area Power Administration estimated that a further 50-foot decline in Lake Mead's elevation would reduce annual power output by 25%, an energy deficit equivalent to removing electricity from 400,000 homes. The agricultural sector faces losses that dwarf the infrastructure damage. The Colorado River Basin supports $1.4 trillion in annual economic activity. Irrigated agriculture alone accounts for $5.7 billion in direct crop value per year in Arizona. A full Tier 3 cutback sustained over 5 years, modeling from Arizona State University's Decision Center for a Desert City suggests, could eliminate 40% of that output permanently as growers abandon fields that cannot be economically re-irrigated. The ecological damage compounds daily. The Colorado River Delta in Mexico, once a 2 million acre wetland ecosystem, has been reduced to 5% of its original extent. Species including the Yuma ridgeback sucker and the Colorado pike minnow are functionally extinct in sections of the river below Lake Mead. For historical comparison, the 1930s Dust Bowl displaced 2.5 million people across the Great Plains. Water economists at the Pacific Institute project that a dead pool event at Lake Mead within the next 20 years could trigger displacement of a comparable scale across the American Southwest. Dr. Ann Castle, Senior Fellow at the Getches Wilkinson Center for Natural Resources at the University of Colorado, testified before the House Natural Resources Committee in March 2024 and said this: "The voluntary conservation agreements we have reached are not sufficient to close the gap. We are buying time. We are not solving the problem." The Bureau of Reclamation's own 2023 modeling projected that without structural reallocation, not voluntary agreements, not market-based incentives, but mandatory cuts, Lake Mead has a 34% probability of reaching dead pool elevation by 2036. Castle was explicit. Current federal policy is managing the decline, not reversing it. This is not a regional water shortage. It is systemic infrastructure failure unfolding in slow motion across the most water-stressed geography in North America. Right now, along the Nevada shoreline of Lake Mead, the exposed lakebed stretches for miles where open water stood 2 decades ago. Bleached white calcium carbonate coats the canyon rock in a permanent geological record of loss. Boat ramps end in cracked mud. Marina docks rest on packed sand. The air above the reservoir smells faintly of mineral sediment and baked alkali. A razorback sucker circles a shrinking thermal pool near the old Virgin River confluence, far from the main channel, unable to reach it. Does the federal government understand what dead pool actually means at the intake tower level? Not the number on the website, but the engineering reality? Did the 7 states that signed a 1922 compact during a wet anomaly ever intend to bind 25 million future lives to a number that was always wrong? And when the turbines go silent, who will be held responsible for the century of warnings that were filed, reviewed, and ignored? The Colorado River Compact has never been structurally renegotiated. The intake towers at Hoover Dam were not redesigned for a hotter, drier century. 25 million people are downstream of a decision made in 1922, and the river does not care what any document says it owes them.